Hi folks, with Tacitus today. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the some recent cases in the UK where climate protesters that were flagrantly and blatantly breaking the law and have been doing so on multiple occasions and have already been into court and have had warnings and probations and goodness knows what, but they've been given some prison sentences. Now, this is in stark contrast. If you look at somebody makes a mean tweet online about complaining about mass migration, and they'll get sent to prison. But the climate protesters can create vast levels of disruption, law breaking, and goodness knows what. And some of them, many of them, don't even get arrested in the first place. And if they do, when it gets to court, they get a slap on the wrist, a $50 fine, and in some cases it's not even being recorded, that they go straight back on the street and do the same thing again. So these climate protesters are supremely confident, or have been supremely confident, they'll suffer no consequences for their law breaking, but they'll scream and point and accuse everyone else of being a Nazi and a fascist, and they want brutal prison sentences for anyone who, for example, disagrees with mass migration or doesn't like gay lesbian porn being taught in primary schools or something like that. Now, there was a recent one in Australia where the classic, the young gender studies, low IQ gender studies chick that does disrupts the traffic in the downtown area of a major city and then refuses to move when the police ordered. She gets arrested, and then all her legal fees, and this is something that happens a lot with the climate protesters, all her legal fees, all her lawyers, even her travel to and from the court and her accommodation, her food, everything is paid for by NGOs. So she's able to get away without any liabilities or responsibilities, financial or otherwise. It gets to court, and then the judge, in effect, just throws it out and says, in fact, you're a hero. You're standing up for the planet against all those evil, straight white men. So the judge, they managed to nearly every time, they managed to have the case heard by an activist judge. I mean, how do you arrange that? That means the administrative clerks and operatives in the court are able to fix it and put the fix in to make sure the activist judge hears the case. Not every judge is a climate activist, for goodness sakes, or an activist of any sort. So that all has to be arranged. And now that's straight away you're looking at subversion and perversion of the judicial legal process just in that, just making sure the activist judge gets to hear it. And also to make sure it's heard in a jurisdiction where the prosecutor's department is only going through with it because it's been such a public event, and they're less than, and they put the intern lawyer onto the case to secure a conviction, and the intern lawyer is themselves an activist who's deliberately botching the case to make sure that the prosecution don't win it. So they all, multiple layers of activism going on and so on. So I was with surprise that a few months ago I saw some, I think this was in the UK, I saw some activists that were getting quite short sentences, 3 or 4 months, that sort of thing. But and that seemed to be a step forward. When you look at it, though, it's not. Is it really 3 or 4 months? So let's just say it's 4 months. Then it's 2 months non-parole. So they can be let out really in 2 months. So 4 months is the headline number. So they get 2 months. Then they get various allowances that are at the discretion of the parole boards, the prison management, the Home Office and this sort of thing. So they're really down to 2 months. Then with good behavior, it's down to 6 weeks. And then after 3 weeks, they become eligible for some sort of day release or weekend release or whatever program. So they can go out and pretend that they're studying some course at some local community college or something like that. and then they can get out during the day for the community college, and they only have to come back at night. Then they sign up for a bit of community service on the weekend, but that'll be with their climate, their climate activist buddies at some bullshit NGO. So then they get the weekend off as well. So in reality, they get maybe 2 to 3 weeks in prison, and then they're on day release and weekend release. Day release to study something or allegedly study some, weekend release to allegedly do community service work, which isn't anything of the sort, by the way. They're just hanging out with their buddies. And so all they have is 7 nights a week in prison. And even that's only for a few weeks, and then they're out. So it's hardly a brutal and onerous affair. Now, just recently, there was a repeat offender activist who thinks she's, one of them, and I think it's again Britain, and she thinks she's some sort of fucking demigod. But I think they got 2 years. But again, when you break it down to non-parole period and the various day releases and community service type releases, I'd be very surprised if she serves, or either of them. I think there were 2. I'd be very surprised if they really are in prison for longer than a few months, if that. And then they'll be out in all sorts of different programs, and again, day releases and study releases and community service releases that'll be organised and orchestrated through the NGOs that they've really, who put them up to this activism in the first place. So, and again, as far as I'm aware, the NGOs have paid all their legal fees and so on. Now, it's very different for, if, I don't know, if I do some march down the main street against mass migration, not that I'm planning to, incidentally. I think placard waving and street marching is quite vulgar, but nonetheless, I go around waving signs and screaming and shouting and so on. I get arrested. I mean, I'm against the globalist project. I mean, wow, prison for you, motherfucker. So I get an activist prosecutor going hard after me, and now I'll have to pay all my. No NGO is going to come to my assistance. No one's going to pay my legal fees. So it's very different. So when I think about, or anyone for that matter, thinks about placard waving and screaming about any issue where they run the risk of being arrested, where they have to meet all the legal fees and they have to fight it out themselves, and the total responsibility is on them, then that has a very sobering effect on people. They're much less likely to engage in that level of risky behaviour given the possible consequences. But these climate activists and pro-mass migration activists, Palestinian activists, anything that supports directly or indirectly the actuality or the purpose of the globalist program, the Palestinian activists create social division in the West. That's what the globalists want. So tick that they support that. The climate change stuff again creates disruption and division. Tick the mass migration, again, tick. So you do any of those things and you don't really have any, but you oppose any of those things. For example, there was in Australia, there was a bunch of climate activists blocking the main road in the downtown, and some of the people who were being held up tried to physically move them out the way, and the police stood there doing nothing. Well, the climate activists spread mayhem, but as soon as someone tried to move them out of the way, the police arrested them. That's the insanity of the times we live in. But if these climate activists had to meet all the costs and all the aggravation and everything themselves, the full force of the state coming after them, then they wouldn't dream of doing this. Nobody would want that sort of aggravation. But when they get a prosecutor that doesn't really want to prosecute them, a judge that doesn't want to convict them, and an NGO that's paying all the legal fees, travel costs, everything, then it's if you're a young person, it's, oh wow, look at this, I'm so important, I'm a sort of an ideological martyr for my cause and all this sort of thing. Then it's you're being some edgy cool chick. So when you walk into back into the gender studies classroom, everybody stands up and applauds you. So it's very different from someone who's going to be in prison for a couple of years, a real prison term of 2 years, in a prison where you're surrounded by murderers and cutthroats and goodness knows what. You've got to meet all your legal expenses. You're now bankrupted. You'll never get a decent job in your life, and so on and so forth. Then that's very different. And those sort of responsibilities and consequences are what the other side, people that oppose the globalist project, that's what they have to put up with, but not the people who are in support, again, directly or indirectly, of the globalist project. So I'm not getting too excited about these 2 years. I mean, it's better than nothing, of course, but I'm not getting excited about these 2-year prison terms when in reality it's going to be 2 to 3 months in prison, if that, and then all sorts of various programs, releases, day releases, community service releases, good behaviours and non-paroles, and when you boil it all down, they'll be in effect out of prison in a few months. So even so, now they won't have any cost to me. The NGOs will cover all those costs, so they get 3 months as a ideological martyr hero, and really no other penalty. So I don't think that's sufficient penalty for these sort of people. The state has to come down as hard on them as they do on people who put mean tweets online. Or that guy in England that put signs up saying it's okay to be white, and they put him in prison for 2 years. They raid his house and magically find swastikas everywhere. Why aren't they raiding the houses of these climate activists and saying, posters of Stalin were everywhere, and homophobic hater Che Guevara, who murdered homosexuals, and Stalin that butchered and murdered tens of millions of people. Those posters were found. The evilness of it, why aren't they doing that? But clearly they're not coming down hard on these people, and they're getting away, I think, still getting away with a whole lot that they shouldn't be. You've been Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.